We've now got a reasonable idea of what interfaces do for us, but we still have a lot to learn about how they're actually implemented in real Go code. So in this section and in the next couple of videos, we're going to build a little application and dive into the standard documentation and take a look at some of the default standard interfaces that we get access to with Go. And this will give us a much better sense of how we generally make use of interfaces as we're just starting off with Go code. Okay, so we'll first start off with a little diagram that's going to explain the little project we're going to work on. Now this is going to be a very small program, very few lines of code, but it's going to give us a really good understanding of exactly how to use interfaces in the standard library. So we're going to write a program that's going to make an HTTP request to google.com, and then we'll take just whatever response comes back to us and we'll print it out at the terminal. Now at first glance here, you might be thinking, well, Stephen, this looks awfully straightforward, but trust me, there's actually a little bit of complexity buried in here, specifically around all this interface stuff. So let's get to it. We're going to first start off by flipping on over to our code editor, and we're going to make an entirely new project directory. So we'll go up to File, we'll hit Open, we'll create a new directory, and I'm going to call this one interfaces_HTTP. Actually, let's just call it HTTP. What the heck? And I'll open up this folder. And then I bet you can guess what comes next. Yes, we're going to make our main.go file. We'll declare the package name at the top, and then we'll declare our func main, like so. Okay, so let's now flip on over to our standard library documentation and figure out how we just make a regular old HTTP request with Go. So let's not worry just yet about printing it out or anything like that to the terminal. Just, hey, how do we make an actual request? So I'm going to open up my browser. I'm going to open up a new tab, and I'll go to golang.org/pkg. And then once here, remember we want packages. If you want to /pkg, you should automatically be dumped there. Now we're going to scroll down a little bit until we find the net package. So we'll scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. And here is net right here. So the net package is for a network interface. One package within net is the HTTP package, and that's specifically what we want to do. We want to make use of this package to make an HTTP request. So we're looking at the documentation for package HTTP, and then if we just go down to the very first line of code right here, yeah, this is pretty much how we make a GET request, and that's it. Not a lot of complexity here. So definitely making the request is the easy part. Now, I don't want to just copy paste this line of code right here. I want to actually read some documentation around it because that's actually going to be really important for our application. So we're going to go and find the documentation for this GET function. Now, it is a little bit buried, so bear with me for a second. We're going to scroll on down until we find the index section. So here's index right here, and then there's a lot of functions within this package. So we're specifically going to first look for something called type response. So we'll scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. Here's type request. That's not what we want. We want type response. So here's type response right here. And then specifically function get. So when we call get, it returns as a first argument something that is a pointer. Remember what that star is right there. That's a pointer to something of type response. And then as a second argument, it returns an error object. So we'll click on that and check out the documentation a little bit. So yeah, we call function, or excuse me, we call get, we pass in the URL that we want to fetch, and then it returns back to us a pointer to a response object and an error object. And of course, the error is only going to exist if one actually occurred. So I think that's probably enough to at least get started with making the request. So let's flip back over to our code editor. Inside the main function, we'll write resp, representing the response we get back, comma, error, and then we'll say http://get, and then we'll pass in the string that we want to make the request to. So this is going to be the actual URL, the actual address. And so for us, we would really want to do just google.com as a total test right now. So we will say make a request to http://google.com, like so. Now do note that you cannot just say google.com. You have to specifically write out http://. So make sure you get that part on there. Okay, so this will go and make the request. It'll then assign the response object to a resp right here. And if there was an error, assigned to error. So of course, with any error handling, we need to always make sure that we handle it in some fashion. So we'll say if error is not equal to nil. And remember, with error handling, we try to apply a very common sense approach. And so we'll just say that if something wrong happened, we will exit the program right away and we'll print out some error message. So we'll say format.println error colon, and then we'll print out the error that occurred. And then we'll also make sure that we just completely exit the program. So we'll say os.exit 1, like so. Okay, now when I save the file, you'll notice a whole bunch of import statements pop up here. Remember, if you're using any other editor, you'll want to make sure you get these import statements in there. Okay, so we still have a red squiggly here because we defined the variable resp, short for response, but we didn't actually make use of it. So you know what? I had said that we want to just log out the response, whatever we get from this right here. So hey, what the heck? Let's take a very kind of naive, common sense approach here. I'm going to tell you right now, this is not the right approach. We still have to look into all this interface stuff, but we'll just take out a very simplistic approach right now, and we'll say format.println resp. Okay, so we're just going to print out the response, and hopefully that's going to contain the actual response that we got back from Google. Now, I want to point out at this point that looking at the code that we have right here, if we were working with just about any other language, and I'm specifically thinking about like Ruby, JavaScript, and Python, this code right here, when we printed out the response, we would probably, maybe we would have to dig around this thing right here, but somewhere in this response object or response whatever it is probably going to be the actual response body that we got back from Google. So just pointing out that with any other language, things would probably work as we would expect. But of course, Go is going to be just a little bit different. So let's flip over to our terminal and run this program and just see what happens. So I'm going to change on over to the terminal. We'll change into that HTTP folder, and then we'll run go run main.go. Okay, so when we do, it looks like we get back something that represents the actual response, because I see stuff like server, I see some headers, but I definitely don't see any actual body to the response. Maybe there's something in here that is actually called body, but definitely I don't see any like actual thing that seems to represent the body. So I think that we still have a little bit of work to do. And as you might guess, this is where some of this interface stuff is going to start coming into play. So let's take a quick break. We're going to come back in the next section, and we're going to start really digging into the documentation around this resp object right here and figure out how we actually really print the body of the response back to the user. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.